This is the Washington and Oregon hemp production and regulations update. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sunny Summers. I am the Cannabis Policy Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I am going to be joined by Stephen Howe, who is the hemp coordinator for the Washington Department of Ag. What we thought we would do is, I'm PowerPoint heavy anymore in my life, so I thought I'd kind of go through a quick kind of PowerPoint overview, and then Stephen can talk to you about where Washington is the same or different, and then we can open it up for questions from all of you. Does that work for you guys? Okay. And Steve, do not heckle me. I see you. I decided to start with this slide. So those of you who've seen my presentation have probably seen this before. I don't think any of us ever expected to be where we are today. So 2015, Oregon started issuing registrations. We had 13 registered growers and 105 registered acres. Last year, we ended with just over 1,900 growers and right around 64,000 acres. Holy smokes. So for those of us who hate tables, I thought for fun last night, I would put together a little diagram of what those numbers look like. So the top line being growers, the bottom line being handlers. So if you receive raw hemp in Oregon and you are going to turn it into something else, you need to be registered as a handler. So that's going to include those folks who are trimming buds into really pretty retail-ready flowers or pre-rolls. So unfortunately, we are different than the marijuana system. Growers cannot make pre-rolls or ready-to-smoke flowers. You can separate it. You can trim it off the stalk and put it in one bin to sell to somebody else to make it really pretty. You can do that with your grower. But if you're going to turn it into a retail ready, it's going from that definition of raw hemp to a hemp item. And you need to be registered as a handler with the department to do that. And then all the other things that we traditionally would think of as a handler, folks receiving that to make an extract or concentrate, or if you're like a seed cleaner and you're taking in seed, cleaning it from other growers and packaging it for resale, then you would need to have a handler as well. So the other number I thought this one was pretty interesting. Again, these are those same numbers that we saw on the first slide, just in a visual form. Kind of gives you an idea of where we're going. I think the department has thought every year that this number might flatten off. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. Is it going to flatten off, or are y'all going to keep making this go up? And then this map is from August. Green being outdoor production, the yellow blobs, if you can see those, being greenhouses, and the pink means y'all gave us bad GPS locations and we've got to fix you. Yeah. So certainly, Valley, Central Oregon, some stuff happening over in the Ontario area. We had some researchers from China here, and the day-to-day program manager for our hemp program is Gary McInich, if you've ever worked with him. Super nice guy, right? And the researcher's saying, well, why do we see these fields where we're seeing them? And he's talking about the weather and the climate, and I said, yeah, and we've got this, historical heritage culture of growing all things cannabis in Southern Oregon, right? And the researchers just kind of, I don't know how well it translated, but you know what I'm talking about. So for ODA's purposes, we've tried since 2015 to treat this the same as any other crop. We all know it's not 100% the same, right? You have to register with us. What? I don't have to register to grow grass seed. But as much as possible, our director at the time was like, welcome to the family. You're just one more of the 220 some odd crops that we work with in Oregon, and we're happy to work with you. That's why they hired my position, to have kind of one person that dealt with all the weird idiosyncrasies between hemp and marijuana and how that interacts with our programs. So pesticides, that one's tricky. Very few pesticides are legally allowed for use on any form of cannabis because of how they're regulated. All of the risk assessment, how are you being exposed to it, how much can you be exposed to, how much can fish in the environment, birds in the environment be exposed to, all of that is done at the federal level. Well, we all know the feds didn't look at your crop until recently, right? So that makes it tricky. And if we don't regulate pesticides appropriately, the EPA will come in and regulate it. And they don't usually have a sense of humor like we do, right? We really want to help you do the right thing, and if you screw up, we'll do the enforcement piece if we have to, and get you going down the road in the right direction. 2015, our legislature said hemp is not an adulterant in food. Woo, wee-haw. Doesn't mean that at the federal level, it's not considered an adulterant in food, right? And those of you that were in the session before know that I said the 2018 Farm Bill didn't wave a magic wand and solve all of these issues. That's a big one, right? This industry got built up. People are like, but I see CBD products everywhere, right? I see them at the shoe store. I see them at my barber shop. I heard that Casper, that makes mattresses, is making a CBD melatonin product to sell at the stores where you buy your mattress, right? So buy your mattress, buy your sleep aid. Cool idea, I get it. But the feds, the FDA, has said that CBD is not allowed in a dietary supplement or food. So we've got some issues there, right? In Oregon, we say it's legal. At the federal level, nothing is easy with this crop. I used to think marijuana was hard. Now I know hemp is hard. Ag water quality, weights and measures, all of those good things. But those pesticides and food safety are definitely the ones where we run into the most trouble of how do we treat you the same as everybody else. We're trying. Feds are trying. It's going to take us a while. So in Oregon, if you're growing, you have to be registered with the department. We changed the registration fee this year, and I think it threw everybody off on filling out the application. Last year, we had a 30% failure rate of people getting us incomplete information. This year, we're talking 80%. So if one of our staff call you or email you, please get back to us, because we're not going to issue your registration. And then when you call and say, where's my license? We're going to say, well, you never got back to us with the information. And quite honestly, it slows down the entire process for everybody because we're spending so much time following up with people. So I apologize if we, somehow screwed up that application and made it so darn confusing that you can't fill it out. But things like GPS location, really critical. We have to know where you're growing that crop, and you want us to know because when law enforcement calls ODA and says, is this a legal hemp farm? You want us to say yes, right? We are staying with the pre-harvest test of 28 days in Oregon, at least through October 31st of this year. We did move to a total THC standard to meet the federal requirements, but we have not adopted the 15 days or any of the other pieces that the interim final rules USDA put out have. And then we talked about if you're turning it into something else, you have to be licensed, and there's testing requirements throughout. Read the rules. Okay. Oregon is operating under the 14 Farm Bill for the rest of the year. I think Stephen's going to have something different to say for Washington. But basically, the 2018 Farm Bill created a federal program for hemp. The 14 Farm Bill didn't. It said states could have pilot programs, but there was no hemp program at the federal level. Now USDA has a hemp program, and they managed to put out draft or interim rules by October 31st of last year, which was monumental considering they had a month-long vacation at the beginning of the year when the government shut down. So it says we have to know where you're growing hemp. We have to sample and test that hemp prior to harvest to verify that it meets the THC requirements. It says that states have to have disposal procedures in place for those crops that fail, that we have compliance provisions, meaning if you do something naughty, we have to take enforcement action. We have to be able to share that information with USDA and law enforcement. ODA already does many of these things. We may not meet exactly what the USDA requires, but we're pretty darn close. And then we have to let them know that we have the resources or personnel to carry out those activities. We are working on hiring more staff. We have money in our account. We have to get approval by legislature to hire more staff, and it looks like that is going to happen. So last night we submitted public comments to the USDA. By the way, you can do that through today. Today is the last day that they will accept public comments on those rules. So if you have questions or comments, Let them know how those rules are going to affect you personally. Provide them with data. Don't just call them bad names. I've seen some of them. The rules they put out say that the labs have to be approved by the DEA. We have 0, as of the last time I checked, DEA registered labs in Oregon. You know why that's a problem? DEA labs cannot take marijuana that's not from law enforcement. So all of our private labs that do the marijuana testing under the OLCC program, as far as the DEA is concerned, are illegal. That's our understanding. I could be wrong, but that's our understanding. Our state regulatory lab cannot get DEA registration because we take in marijuana samples from the OLCC system, like through our pesticide program. So we said, that right there will kill the industry in Oregon if we have to use a DEA registered lab. Obviously, a 15-day pre-harvest window for sampling and testing, much less what part of the plant you're testing, is going to be a deal breaker for us here as well. Those rules say that if your pre-harvest test is above 0.5 total THC, you could be charged with criminal negligence. With the variability in genetics, weather, ability to get somebody out there to harvest your crop, you could, and a bunch of people that are new to farming, right? Earlier we had about half the room that were conventional farmers and half that were new to agriculture. You are not willfully, intentionally, etc., trying to test above 0.5. And I don't know where they got that number from. Says you have to be a DEA reverse registration person, meaning you have to be registered with the DEA to take in that crop if it fails, because now it's marijuana. I mean, really? I think having you document that you've destroyed that crop, you've rendered it unusable, you've either tilled it in, you've composted it, you burned it, right? People laugh about that one. You let them burn marijuana? Yeah, y'all are failing at like 0.4. I mean, who's gonna smoke that and get high, right? So keeping that material on the farm makes better agronomic sense than taking it to the burner in Brooks. Not to mention, I don't have a dump truck big enough to haul some of the biomass you guys are harvesting. So that was a problem. And then we're asking for them to let us submit a state plan for approval earlier in the year, but having implementation dates of January 1st, because our registrations are on the calendar year. So the Farm Bill says we can continue to operate under the 14 Farm Bill for a year after the USDA put rules out. That leaves us with a 2-month gap based on how we do licensing. So we've asked them to do something to extend that gap. That's a little bit outside of USDA. That may take a federal legislative change, but we're hoping that by putting it out there, we can get them to approve that. And then what did I spend a lot of my time last year talking about? I call this the gateway crop, right? Because we've got people that are new to agriculture that if we can teach them how to be good farmers, are going to start growing other crops. And they tend to be younger than the average age of a farmer in Oregon, which is 59 plus, right? And we're always talking about in agriculture, how do we get people involved? How do we get people active in farming again? Maybe this. But it also means that they need a lot of education. They need to learn how to be good neighbors. They need to learn how to use pesticides properly. How do they manage the soil properly? How do they grow a crop? How do we develop supply chains in this industry? So we talk a lot about that. The USDA rules in our state plan. If you're growing for CBD or marijuana, you don't want pollen anywhere near your plant. Again, if you have a new farmer, maybe they don't know to go out and look for the males, right? And those suckers can sneak up on you from what I understand. If you're not lifting the leaves and looking for the dangly bits, you've got problems. Law enforcement is struggling. It looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. It's maybe not a duck. That is a paradigm shift for them. And we've got to help them, and we've got to be good stewards of this commodity to show them that you're doing things correctly and that you're not just trying to sneak illegal marijuana through the system. And then in Southern Oregon, we've had a lot of issues with concerns about Do people have legal water rights to grow that crop? What are y'all doing about the plastic that's now sitting out in the field and blowing into the neighbor's property? Because I'm getting those emails too, right? Not a good picture to paint for this crop. So how do you, I mean, you're still overcoming the fact that some folks are looking at you and saying you're growing, that terrible weed, right? So how do you move beyond that? Those are the kind of things that we're dealing with in this state. I touched on this. We've got about 3 times the number of applications in Oregon this time of year that we did last year. Every time you call and say, where's my application, means that somebody's attention looking at an application and reviewing it now just got distracted to go through the pile and look for your application to see where it is in the process. Again, if ODA reaches out to you, please try and be responsive. We're putting additional people in. We've asked that program to start working 6 days a week for the next 2 weeks to try and get us back to our normal 2 to 4 week process. And as always, as complete as you can be with that application, there is an instruction cover sheet. Read through that, follow it, and know that we are doing our best, and we really do want to get those applications turned around in a quicker time frame, and we're trying to find ways to do that. And I think I'll turn it over to Stephen.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Howe with the Washington State Department of Agriculture Hemp Program. If you missed it with Sonny's introduction. So basically, with the 2014 Farm Bill and Washington State's Research Pilot Program, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of participation in that. There was about 7 to 8 clients that were licensed to do that. So there wasn't a lot of data to gain from that, or information to gain from that, or agronomics, or anything of the sort. The 2018 Farm Bill came along, it passed it, and legalized hemp at the federal level. That in turn drove our state to take initiative to pass our own state legislation in 2019 to make our state law to be in accordance with the 2018 Farm Bill, as well as give regulatory authority to the Washington State Department of Agriculture to regulate hemp at the state level. So part of that statute, that law was Department of Agriculture had regulatory authority. The whole hemp plant was tested. Our testing methodology had to be done without heat, which is high performance liquid chromatography. And 30-day, well, there wasn't any protocol guidance, so we had to develop our own sampling protocol as well as our own testing protocol. And pretty much we copied what Oregon was doing, what Montana was doing, took the best of both worlds, and created those protocols out there. And the industry exploded with the passage of that statute. We went from 7 clients to over 130 in a quick amount of time. It moved fast and furious, and 5,000 to 6,000 acres were planted. So we had to test all of that, sample all of that, and everything was tested. All acreage was tested, and nobody came back hot from that testing. So the statute also stated January 1st that the research pilot was going to be eliminated in the state. So we had to, in accordance with the 2018 Farm Bill, submit our state plan to the USDA, as well as do rulemaking simultaneously to have a program in place come January 1st. And we couldn't do that until a lot of those questions in the Farm Bill further guidance was given by the USDA or the federal government of how that was going to be answered at the federal level. So once the interim final rule was published on October 31st, that's when we took the initiative to develop our state plan and do expedited rulemaking at the same time to have our state plan submitted to USDA, as well as have rules in place so that a hemp program can continue business as usual at the beginning of the year. So our rules, state plan, are everything in accordance with the USDA's interim final rule. We realized there's going to be problems and challenges and issues along the way with working with those guidelines, working with those rules, and we're expected to face those. For instance, the 15-day sampling before harvest, we got it, okay. So we got to have enough laboratories in place. We have to have enough field staff in place to go out and sample all of those fields. We realized too at that time with sampling, since the federal government said the flower portion will be the part that is sampled, so that took away our state's whole plant sampling. There's going to be issues with hemp coming back hot from that, and things of those nature. But as an agency, we're going to be able to make it happen as far as the sampling and testing of all the hemp in the state, and stuff like that. And as far as the testing methodology goes when it comes to total THC or Delta-9 THC, total THC is what we did in 2019, be it using the testing methodology of HPLC. So that's not going to change as we go into 2020. And I know there's a lot of confusion, primarily in the Washington industry, about what does that total THC mean exactly. And what it means is there's two common testing methodologies for THC concentration, be it gas chromatography or high performance liquid chromatography. As I stated before, by statute, we are to use a testing methodology that does not use heat, and that's HPLC. So using HPLC, there is no decarboxylation of the THCA in that material as it's tested. So the THCA amount, as well as Delta-9 THC, if naturally present in the material, is measured as well. And then a scientific calculation is applied to find out what the Delta-9 THC amount is in that THCA, which then gives you the overall Delta-9 THC for that material. And that's the number, the only number that matters is what is the Delta-9 THC amount in that material by USDA guidance and by our own state guidance. As well, something to take into consideration also is with the USDA's interim final rule and now our state's rule, laboratories also have to submit what their measurement of uncertainty is, or in layman's term, what their margin of error is in our plus or minus format for that test. And then that number, whatever it is, whatever that laboratory is, was just based on numerous scientific factors, is added and subtracted to what that measured Delta-9 THC amount is, and then that gives you a range. And at the lower end of that range, if you fall at the 0.3% or below, then the material would be compliant. Some of the other issues that we were facing and we were working through, and we were absolutely operating in good faith, is the DEA registration aspect that laboratories have to meet. We're working in close conversation with both the USDA and DEA about how that is going to be facilitated, and as a state, how are we going to ensure that we're doing the right thing as far as meeting the federal guidance goes. So we're working with them. We've communicated out to the laboratories in the state that do cannabis testing, and kind of like, hey, here's what right now the requirements are. And right now we're saying at a minimum, if you apply with them, you won't get denied by the DEA. But at a minimum, if you apply, we're showing good faith as a state that we're meeting federal guidance until either the USDA changes or the DEA develops policy of how they're going to allow laboratories to get DEA registered to test hemp. Specifically also in states that have recreational marijuana or medicinal marijuana. How that's going to be included as well. And that's been definitely a topic that we've raised with the DEA, and there's many, many other states out there across the country that are having the same issue, and the DEA is fully aware of that. The bottom line is there hasn't been any policy developed by the DEA of how they are going to involve hemp into their code of federal regulations. Other than that, that's pretty much in a nutshell, unless anybody has any questions or if you had anything for Sonny. So as well, by statute, state statute, we only have regulatory authority over licensing of hemp producers or growers. We don't have any regulatory authority as a hemp program over licensing or regulating processors. The caveat to that is the only part that is regulated as far as processing goes is the food processing aspect of it, because there's a food safety division in our department. But other than that, all other processing is allowed in the state. There just isn't any specific regulatory guidance, nor is there any agency in the state that has regulatory authority over that activity. And we did in the beginning try to include something to at least have processors report to us where their facilities were, where they were processing at, as well as if they were processing material that was going to be utilized for human consumption, that it was tested for a minimum things to protect public health. But we didn't have any regulatory authority, and this went through our Attorney General's office and all of that. So we did add in there, though, at a minimum, a voluntary method to test material in the instance that you want to use it for human consumption. Does that answer the question, Jessica?
Yeah, I think really about you guys handle handling. So once we've tested it for THC and it's hemp, that's where our regulatory
Right.
ends.
Yep.
We don't have handlers, we don't have processors, we don't have any of those things.
Did everybody hear that? Yeah. So once we conduct pre-harvest testing, and the material comes back compliant, and we issue our THC certification saying that material is compliant, that's where our Department of Agriculture's jurisdiction ends as far as the hemp operations go. Unless you're doing food processing, then we continue on with the regulatory guidance of that activity. But other than that, there is no oversight of processing of hemp in the state and stuff like that. And I would just like to add that we've raised all these concerns to our Department of Health, to our Liquor and Cannabis Board and stuff like that, about some issues that may come from that lack of regulatory guidance. So we'll see where it goes from there, if the state's going to make a legislative change or if there's going to be changes at the federal level or whatever. We are ready to adapt to whatever that case may be through policy. Until the USDA's interim final rule hits its sunset in 2021 and they are ready to publish their final rule, we will at the same time conduct rulemaking at the state level to publish what our final program administrative code will be.
Yeah, so let's start with some questions, ma'am.
So you're saying these regulations, are they in effect right now?
So
Yes,
the
yes.
question was, are these regulations in effect right now? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you see the legislation changing so that growers can have a processing facility on the same tax lot?
So in Oregon?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So the question was, do we see the rules changing so that growers can have a processing facility on the same tax lot for hemp, right? Well, so they're really not the hemp rules or the marijuana rules that would restrict that, although maybe there's some marijuana stuff about keeping the two completely separate, but it's going to be based on zoning. So it depends on how your county zones that property. There are ways to go through the county to ask for on-site processing. It just depends on if they approve that facility on an EFU property. So that all comes down to the county and how they deal with zoning. But there are some ways to go about that. They can vary greatly from county to county, and they can vary greatly in how much it costs to go through that process. Yeah. So the question was, any special rules for getting flower into rec stores in Washington?
Yeah, so the Liquor and Cannabis Board does have rules for outside hemp products to enter the I-502 regulatory environment. But that's the Liquor and Cannabis Board's jurisdiction, and that'd be the best agency to answer those questions.
And for those of you here in Oregon, there are rules. Again, those are through the OLCC as well, but they're going to require you to be registered with ODA. So you do end up working with both programs, but definitely talk to OLCC first because it has to be tested entered in metric and then tested. So if you have it tested outside of metric, you'll still have to have it tested again once you get in metric. Yes, sir.
We were going to open up a dispensary, and we talked to OLCC, and OLCC said we have nothing to do with that.
So I'm not sure who you ended up speaking with at OLCC. They do have a hemp specialist within OLCC. So maybe you want to talk to him directly, Stephen Crowley. ODA and OLCC also did a 2-part podcast. OLCC maintains an In the Weeds, tongue-in-cheek, podcast for various issues within their regulatory system. And we did one specifically on hemp and marijuana and how hemp would get into the OLCC system. So that might be useful for you as well.
I have a question. Did the Washington State Department of Ag come out against CBD as an additive to food at the state level?
So the Washington State Department of Agriculture specifically did not, but by statute we had to follow federal guidelines and laws, and the FDA's right now is prohibiting CBD from being added to food or beverages as sold as a dietary supplement. So right now that is our current policy.
Different legislature. Yeah, in the back. So the question is, how many testing labs does Washington hope to have this year?
Well, that's a great question. For 2019, we had one third-party contracted lab, and they were able to meet the workload, although they did get overwhelmed. And we did have our state agencies lab, which we only had one retest that happened there. And the turnaround is significantly larger at our state agencies lab, as well as the cost. For 2020, I'm doing as much outreach that you possibly can to all the laboratories in our state, letting them know, hey, eventually in the very near future, we will be submitting a request for proposal to the state for cannabis labs out there to bid on a contract to do hemp testing for the Department of Agriculture in 2020. And our intent is to have as many labs as possible. There's no cap on how many labs we're going to have, as many as we can get contracted, so that A, we can meet the 15-day turnaround, and B, that no laboratory out there is going to be overwhelmed with hemp samples.
Any questions on this side? Yeah, in the back. So the question was, in Oregon for farmers, should you be looking at the 14 Farm Bill or the 18? Neither. Look at the Oregon rules. That's what you need to be looking at. Yeah, so Oregon's rules are current and active until we tell you otherwise. We're waiting to see what the legislative session does and if they give us authority to do background checks and meet the 2018 Farm Bill and the USDA interim final rules. So we're kind of waiting for that piece. Then at that point, and hopefully, USDA will be reviewing those public comments. I'm hoping, and maybe I'm just super optimistic, that they're going to make some changes to those interim final rules. They can do that. They can operate under them for 2 years, or they can make changes. So they have the option to make changes. DEA has the option to make changes, and I've heard rumblings that maybe there'll be something along those lines. So I'm kind of in the, wait and see. You're good through October 31st under what we have right now, for sure. For those of you that might have to harvest after that, we'll start talking about that in June or July when we get new rules into place, and hopefully have had conversations with USDA and either had a state plan approved that has a January 1st implementation date, or they come back and say, no go, it's got to be November 1st, and we'll have to do like a November 1st through December 2021 registration or something along those lines. No. You have to look at the Oregon rules, which are total THC, because I get a lot of people that say, oh, well, the 2014 Farm Bill says Delta 9, right? It is total THC in Oregon as of January 1st. And you can make those decisions up to October 31st. As long as you harvest prior to October 31st, you're 100% in the gold. It's that November, December that we're still up in the air about. Yeah. Other questions?
Thank you for coming today. I have a question about the OLCC hemp certificate. It's my understanding that it has a 1% total THC threshold in the definition. What is the scientific basis of all these discrepancies? 1% total, 0.3% total, and then what you were saying about DEA enforcement and destruction of crop.
Sure.
If it's over 0.5.
So a couple things. One, I'm not OLCC. They are in the room, so they'll stop me if I get too far off track. And they're right here, so I can see them. When those rules went into place, Oregon only tested for Delta 9. And we tested 28 days prior to harvest. So you could have a crop that tested below 0.3 for Delta 9, wait that 28 days. We all know that those cannabinoids are going to increase. You dry it, right? It's at a 0. So now when we remove that moisture, that's going to increase your THC concentration. And it has to be tested before it goes into the OLCC system. So nobody's crop would likely test at 0.3% or less. They were concerned about folks growing illegal marijuana and inverting it into the system, right? And so they set a 1% cutoff for that dried plant material that was tested under a Delta 9 only requirement to prevent people from inverting illegal marijuana. So that's kind of where they came up with that 1%. And we looked at some other states that were kind of flexing around that 0.3 and kind of came up with that 1. And that's how we ended up with a 5% for extracts or concentrates coming into the OLCC system as well. Is that they didn't want to see people taking illegal marijuana, concentrating it and being like, wink, wink, nod, nod. I just grew this stuff without any regulatory oversight, and I'm going to make money over here in the OLCC system. The 0.5 beats the hell out of me. I don't know where I think the DEA likely suggested that number, but again, I wasn't part of those conversations, so I'm not sure where they came up with that. Yeah. Questions in the back? Yeah, standing up. So the question was, we have about 3 times the applications in Oregon this time of year than we did in 2019. How many are growers and handlers? I don't know. That manager just sent out an email saying, holy crap, we've got this many applications, and I don't know which are which. But if you want to email hemp-records@oda.state.org.us, all of that information is publicly available. So, and you can go on our website and see which ones we've actually issued to get a feel for what the percentage is between growers and handlers as well. Yes, sir.
So if there's no problems with your application because of the backlog, what time?
Yes, a month at least. What we've decided to do is the applications come in. So just to kind of give you a crib notes on how the process works. We have a licensing program that all they do is licensing and take your money, right? So you send in your application, you either send in your check or your credit card. Once it clears, they send that packet up to the hemp program. And then staff go through and see, is that application complete? If it looks complete, it goes in this pile. If it looks like we're going to spend some time giving you a call, it goes in this pile. And then another staffer will go through and start approving these. But because we have the time it takes for your check or credit card to clear, come upstairs, get separated, reviewed, approved, then it goes back downstairs for them to print it, I would say at least a month. They're saying 6 to 8 weeks right now. Normally our process would be 2 to 4 weeks without a big backlog. So the other thing to keep in mind is if you see it on our website, if you see your business name, but you still haven't received it in the mail, you're good to go. We've approved it. You won't show up on the website until we approve your application. And we're okay if you operate with that information. Yeah.
Couldn't all the criteria be put into an algorithm to automate the process?
It could, but we're the government and those things cost money and take time. We tried. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, couldn't we put it into an algorithm and automate the process? We desperately want to do that. Absolutely. But we're not private industry and we don't move very quickly. So, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of frustration working with the labs and the fact that the variation. Yeah, so start there. Those testing requirements are set by the Oregon Health Authority, and they will be going into rulemaking here this spring to talk about testing rules. Maybe not this piece specifically, but that might be a place to talk to them. We are statutorily required to follow those testing requirements. The labs are accredited by the Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. And so how they accredit those labs can affect what kind of variation is acceptable. I would say that if it was harvested in 2019 and it was below a 0.3 delta 9, you can sell that crop in state to a processor. They may not want to take it, but legally you are allowed to sell it. You cannot and have not been able to sell it for 2 years, even though I know a bunch of people were, into the smokable market. Those rules have been in place since 2018. People weren't paying attention, I think, because last year was the year that smokable hemp became the big thing. But if it's going into a processing extraction facility and the pre-harvest test was legal in 2019, you are still 100% legal to transfer that to a hemp processor to be made into an extract or concentrate. Okay, just a couple more questions. Yeah.
Is it illegal to post or ship the flowers or biomass which is more than 0.3 total THC?
Is it illegal to ship it out of state if it's above 0.3 total? Yes. And that also is a law that's been in place for a couple of years. That's actually a criminal statute. So if law enforcement were to stop you and test it, and it tested above 0.3 THC, it says THC, and we're assuming they're looking at total because that's how everything else is tested for marijuana, et cetera. They legally will consider it a marijuana item, and you're looking at potential felony issues.
Yeah, and that is a DEA Code of Federal Regulation. Anything over 0.3% THC qualifies it as a Schedule I controlled substance.
So you could be subject to federal and state criminal liability there. Okay, one more question? Anybody over here? Yes, sir. So for Oregon, for pre-harvest testing, anything, we're going to round. Let me take a step back. We require the labs to report to 2 decimal places, and we use common rounding. So if it's 0.34, we're going to round down to 0.3. If it's 0.35 or above, that gets rounded up to 0.4. What law enforcement does could be something completely different, and that would be something for you and your legal team to work out with them. So appreciate your time. I'm going to stay around a little bit. I have some paraphernalia down in the group area, but unfortunately, because we have 3 times the number of applications, we didn't have staff that could make it up here to staff the booth area, but I will also be back tomorrow morning if you have questions and can't catch me today. Appreciate your time. Thank you.